Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Michael Drury, and I'm the Chairman Emeritus of the Global Interdependence Center, a nonprofit based in Philadelphia, which most of our business is involved in the economy and monetary policy and forming a network of people who are interested in the global economic arena. This is our fifth opportunity to be here in Salt Lake City and share the floor with the Columbus Community Center. And I'm often asked why that happened. And the answer is twofold. The simple answer is that if you're going to be in a network that's focused on the economy, you have to be in a network that's also focused on the community, because they're inseparable. Sometimes my friends in New York City don't believe that, but that is in fact true. And the second reason is that my good friend David Kotok and one of his associates, Peter Damorali, who would frequently come here for business, both ran into Stephanie and the Columbus Community Center at various points over their careers and became involved with it. And Peter unfortunately passed a few years back and founded a small foundation here to support the community center. And we like to lend our aid to that. Now, we often come here, we always have a panel on economics. And I think that it's interesting because the first time we were here 5 years ago, 2013, the economy was not doing particularly well. And today in 2018, we're at a unique point in time where the economy is exceptionally strong. It was already very strong coming into 2018. And now between tax cuts and a large stimulus package, which may or may not be passing the Congress today, the economy is bound to be exceptionally strong for the next 12 months. And that's important because when economies are not doing well, like back in 2013, it's the poor and the bottom end of society that suffers the most. And that's why institutions like the Columbus Community Center are most needed. But when we're at the top of an economic cycle, well, that's the time that you have to think about taking risk. You have to think about checking to make sure that everything works. We have an unemployment rate now that's lower than it's almost ever been in the history of the United States. The black unemployment rate is the lowest it's been in the history of the United States. We need to make sure that the disabled unemployment rate is as low as it's ever been in the history of the United States. We need to think about taking risks because this is the point in time when philanthropy is at its highest. The stock market's great. People have wealth. They're willing to share. There's less fear in the economy than there's ever been. And it's also important that we be pragmatic at this point in the cycle, because what we do this year and what we try this year, if it works, and it needs to be incorporated into the permanent fabric of how we address these problems. And if it doesn't work, it's never going to work. So you have to be pragmatic about try everything, which is what we do here, and at this point, take what works, focus on that, and do it more and more and more. I'd like to thank Stephanie and Kristy and invite Kristy up for her comments. Thank you very much.
Terrific. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our 5th annual Bottom Line of Disabilities. And also thank you to the Global Interdependence Center. You all have been phenomenal supporters of us over the course of the years. And I also want to thank our staff and our board for making this possible. We are company ready, and that takes a lot of time, energy, and effort. And Stephanie, thank you for bringing this to us and making it work. But I also want to thank the presenters that you're going to hear today. Your preparation and your care and your concern, I think we're really in for a good day. Also, thank you to our sponsors, the Sorensen Legacy Foundation, who's our title sponsor, Bank of American Fork, Comenity Bank, Ally Bank, Cumberland Investors, L3 Communications, UBS Bank, University of Utah Department of Psychiatry, Utah Business Leaders, and Greg Ordison. You can see we have a lot of support here. So this is a really exciting year for us. It's our golden anniversary. We'll be celebrating that on June 9th. And our founding families were pioneers in ensuring that their loved ones had equal access to opportunities, allowing them to lead a quality life through integration into our community. As we look back at our simple beginnings, founded in the firm belief of dignity and compassion for all, It is remarkable to see how much has been accomplished over these years. Today, we serve over 420 individuals in housing, employment, training, and day activities. In preparing for our 50th year celebration, we've taken a trip down memory lane by dusting off the scrapbooks, including pictures and news articles that have been tenderly preserved. I have been really entranced with the history of Columbus. We have hosted many sitting governors, also President Ford, and Kim Peek, who Dustin Hoffman's character in the award-winning movie The Rain Man, was a client of ours at its inception, and his father was one of our founding fathers. Our first panel today, we've got a very rich agenda. Our first panel is comprised of parents who have been true mavericks in the disability world. Terrell Dougan, who you're going to hear from, she is our substitute keynote speaker, and thank you so much for filling in. Barry Morrow, who was the producer of Rain Man, is stuck on the West Coast in torrential rains and landslides, so be grateful that you're here in Utah. Terrell wrote a book, and I will say that went well. It was the first book that I read as I came into Columbus, and it really introduced me to this agency. It is just a lovely memoir. And one of the things that came out of this is we've adopted a battle cry that continues on today, and that is to stop agonizing and to start organizing. And I think that's a theme that we carry on as far as changing legislation. And some of the legislation that our founding parents have been able to change was the IDEA Act, which maintained, mainstreamed special needs students into the educational system. Of course, the American with Disabilities Act, the ADA, was a hallmark disability right, and our current advocacy is allowing increased funding for children on the autism spectrum. So these are big things. We started here locally, and a lot of the things were adopted nationally, so we do feel that we are true pioneers in making a difference in the disability movement. Inclusion through economic development has been an underpinning of our many years of success. And our second panel of top economic and financial experts will talk specifically about current economic trends. By paying close attention to the world around us, we've been able to strategically increase the quality of life of those we serve through workforce development, affordable housing, and community integration. Our social entrepreneurship and development of business lines has employed more than 200 individuals with more significant disabilities, some for their entire adult life. Tylene Horton was one of the 8 young who walked into Columbus in 1958, and after 50 years, in her late 60s, she refuses to retire because she takes great pride in her job working in our secure document shredding facility, which provides friendships, meaning, and purpose to her life. Our present includes translating our 50 years of expertise into the world of autism to address the growing need of the service cliff, where an increasing demographic of children aging out of the school system need continued structured supports to allow them to work and live independently. Through a Pay for Success grant, we have tapped into the rich resources of the University of Utah, Sorensen Impact Center, and the Cicero Consulting Group to determine how to engage employers in hiring those on the spectrum. Our third panel will take you through the exciting adventure of big data and evidence-based findings. As we plan for our future, we acknowledge the need to continually reinvent ourselves by finding new ways to continue to serve those most in need in our community. This includes creating work opportunities through innovative solutions that we'll explore with our fourth panel. In a few short weeks, we will be breaking ground on our Hub of Opportunity. This 156-unit, mixed-use, transit-oriented designed apartment complex will contribute to the growing need of affordable housing in the Salt Lake City area, keeping in mind the unique living needs of people with disabilities. A hallmark of our project will be the Next Work Hub, a live-work program for young adults on the autism spectrum that will offer 14 apartments and a vocational training space. The Next Work Hub will provide a safe environment for these young adults to transition to the community living and employment. It is a groundbreaking concept and one that will be the first of the kind in the country. So as you can see, we continue to live up to our founding parents' vision of creating a better future for those in our community who require our additional love and compassion. We believe that what makes us unique also makes us valuable, and that everyone truly deserves the best life our collective efforts can provide. With that, I'd like to invite up our keynote speaker, Terrell Dougan. Terrell became active in advocating for the mentally disabled when she was 12, and her sister Irene, then 6, just had been diagnosed with mental disability as a result of a birth injury. Her father started the first Salt Lake County Association for Retarded Children and created a daycare center and organized and created more services for developmentally disabled children. In 1968, Dougan became the president of the Utah Association for Retarded Children, and in 1972, she was invited to be on the board of directors of the National Association for Retarded Citizens. Now, the Arc of the United States, is that right? Very good. Her book, That Went Well, Adventures in Caring for My Sister, is a humorous and touching memoir about life and her special needs sister. So welcome.
Boy, it's amazing to realize what you all are doing now. When we were doing it in 1968, we were in a little elementary school, Columbus Elementary School. That's why it's called Columbus today. We had gotten the school district to help by donating a school and also taking over the funding, such as it was. But we had a lot of private donors so that we wouldn't panic them. Well, on that day, June 6th, 1968, I drove up to the parking lot of Columbus School and heard on the news that Bobby Kennedy had just been shot. So I just sat there in the car, absolutely dumbfounded, listening to this, and walked kind of in shock to our opening day. We had 6 clients. And they were sitting in a circle in the first little workroom we had, about to look to me like they were going to do maybe a paper craft or something. And in the way that a lot of us do, I greeted them in the, how can I say it, condescending way. We often talk to people we consider won't quite be able to understand us. They say, well, good morning, kids, how are you? And they all looked at me and said, fine. And then I said, well, are we enjoying our first morning at Columbus? And I knew for sure that 2 or 3 of them didn't want to be there. My sister didn't want to be there. My sister, from the time she had been diagnosed, didn't want to be most places that we wanted her to be. I'm going to flash back for a moment on when she was first diagnosed, because my father, when he realized she would have no place to go to school, and there were no services, 0, in the city or the state or anywhere, except the American Fork Training School, the institution where they just warehoused these kids, was just as horrified as I had been on that day of 1968. And he stared out the window for a while, and then the next morning, he wrote a letter to the editor of the paper, both papers, the Salt Lake Tribune and the Deseret News. And it said, I am a parent of a 6-year-old who has just been diagnosed with mental retardation. Is there anyone else in the community who has this in their family who would be interested in starting a daycare center for these children who have no other place to go? And I would come home at age 12, and the phone would be ringing off. Unbelievable. And I'd pick up the phone and there'd be a woman sobbing. No one's ever said those words. I have a child who has this too, and I've just kept her in the house. I'm so ashamed to have her come out. Oh, I'd love to join this group. Well, I was taking names like crazy until Dad got home. And that's how it all started. And we started with the daycare center, and it grew and it grew. Dad got the Rotary Club to join in and buy a bigger building, an old Mormon ward house, which then became the Rotary Training Center. And we realized these kids were growing up and could use a little bit more training skills. Any rate, so on that day in 1968, see, Stephanie, I did get in the letter. She wanted that letter gotten in. I looked around at this little circle, and I said, and what are we doing today? And they looked at me, kind of arts and crafts. And then I said, well, that's nice. Where's your teacher? And by the way, the most handicapped looking of all was probably 350 pounds and sitting in a wheelchair that was kind of spilling over with her fat, I'm sorry to say. And she looked at me and she said, "I'm the teacher, I'm right here." That was my really first lesson, and by then I was something like 27 years old, in realizing how quickly we judge people for what they can't do instead of what they can. And the first person we hired to be the exec of Columbus Community Center was a behavior modification specialist from Utah State University named Glenn Latham. And his name should go into heaven forever in gold. He taught volunteers from the Junior League, I was among them, and other volunteers about what behavior modification was. And it's so simple. Catch somebody doing something right, and then praise and thank the hell out of them, and you'll have them in the palm of your hand forever. Well, we started doing this with the kids, but moreover, we started doing it with our spouses. And remarkably, life turned around for a lot of us. And we have to keep remembering it. Catch them doing something right. Glenn had, his worst case came in, and his name was Dickie Hotelling. And Dickie, his mom was scared to have him come because he was climbing the drapes. I mean, he was just all over. Talk about hyperactive, and you couldn't get his attention for anything. But Glenn pulled out his little cup of M&Ms and also asked Mrs. Hotelling, what else does he like besides candy? And she said money. So he got out a few 50-cent pieces, 20 quarters, and he caught Dickie in 1 second where Dickie was panting and not trying to destroy something, and put an M&M in his mouth. And Dickie went right on doing all of that, and a few more minutes later, he stopped just long enough, and Glenn put another one in his mouth. And he stopped a little longer, so Glenn put another one in his mouth. By noon, he was stopping for quite a while, and Glenn would give him $1 or a quarter. By the time Mrs. Hotelling came, oh, by the way, Glenn said, go home, leave him with me, we'll be fine. When she came home, Dickie was sitting in Glenn's waiting room reading a magazine. Now, the magazine was upside down, but Dickie was absolutely under control and enjoying his day instead of making it a mess for everybody. So we learned so much about that. Well, as these kids grew, of course, we realized, my goodness, they're going to become 21. The school district won't want them anymore. We won't have a place for them to go work. And that's when sheltered workshops started into being. And bless the Kennedy family, they started that Flame of Hope Foundation, where they started a sheltered workshop in Washington, D.C., making candles. And these kids were just thrilled doing that, and packaging them and labeling them and doing all the things that they could do. And then along that time, my father, who ran an ad agency, had an assistant, a guy who worked for him named Fran Peak. And Fran said, oh my goodness, my son's just like your daughter Irene. And they'd both been born in 1946. And Irene and Kim kind of got together and were friends, but Irene didn't like Kim very much. Would you like to know why? He knew everything, and he was so smart at stuff. And he did, indeed, as it shows in Rain Man, read phone books. I mean, his father would say, what should we do when we get to, he'd take him on business trips. What should we do when we get to Toledo? Just give me the phone book. And by the end of the day or the evening or whatever, he'd memorize the phone book. Fran would say, Sally Smith, and he'd give the address and the phone number. And what he would do as he was doing this, his mind going, memorizing it all like a computer, was giggle. There's certain things in math, and I don't know, many of you could be mathematicians who get not only the music of math, but the unbelievable conjunctions of things that make you laugh. Things that are turned around in a funny way, Any rate, if you're that bright, it's a joy and a funny thing. So, at any rate, along comes Barry Morrow. And I got an email from Barry last night as he's putting his wellies on and getting ready to dig out of Santa Barbara and his home. Dear Terrell, thanks for your kind note and willingness to sub for me at the last moment. To me, a man who can write the script for Rain Man walks on water. So I was so excited to get this email. I had just written to him and said, I want exactly the moment you met Kim, because he used Kim and one other fellow like Kim, another savant, to model this character. So far, we're okay here in Santa Barbara with no major mudslides yet, though some dire warnings are still in effect. My wife, Bev, and I just spent the morning dealing with flooding in our backyard. Oh, I know. En route. Thank you. I wrote a guidebook to this town, and I still can't get myself to Columbus. Okay, just a minute here. Barry, where are you? Oh, for Lord's sake. My phone, the Antichrist. Okay. Okay, Barry, back to Barry. Bev and I just spent the morning dealing with flooding in our backyard and garage, and there's an even bigger storm due to arrive later today. But to answer your questions about my meeting Kim, it did begin at the NARC, National Association for Retarded Citizens, we called ourselves then, in Arlington, Texas. Though it was during a morning coffee break that I first encountered the one and only Kim Peek. I had wandered down a hallway when I heard a strange moaning sound coming from inside a room. Concerned that someone might be in trouble, I had ventured in and found Kim pulling books from the shelves of a small library, and in some cases, looking at them, apparently reading them upside down. We began chatting, and over the course of the next half hour or so, I began to understand that I was dealing with a very unique human being. Well, understand might be stretching it. I was actually standing there dumbfounded as Kim reeled off what he knew about me, which was a lot, including the lengthy list of credits that rolled at the end of my TV movie Bill, which starred Mickey Rooney. Luckily, Fran, who had feared I'd gotten lost, eventually arrived. This is Kim's dad, Fran, and began to answer some of my endless queries about Kim. My first question was, as Fran later recalled, where the heck did you get this guy? As for Dustin Hoffman, you know, it went on to win an Oscar for Dustin and the Oscar for screenwriting for Barry. And Barry gave the Oscar to Kim. So Kim has taken that Oscar all over the world and done his birthday trick. Anybody can ask him anything, but he'll just say, you know, what's your date of birth, and he'll tell you it was a Tuesday or a Thursday or whatever. But you can ask him almost anything. They asked, you saw in the movie, if you saw the movie last night, he just reeled off facts just unbelievably. Kim could not shower himself or dress himself or put his shoes on. So what Kim did and what Columbus is doing now and what you are all doing now is focusing on, okay, but what can we do? What can they do? And I am so proud of you. The book that I wrote about my sister, it was called That Went Well, was because every time I tried to organize a program for her or anything, I thought I had her life in perfect order, she would find a way to pull the rug out from under me. I'm talking about throwing a couch through a plate glass window in the group home, and they couldn't handle her. And so many different things. And I had just quickly at the end told Barry that I had written my own little book. It was nothing quite like Rain Man. And he said, if you can find a spare moment tomorrow, please send me a quick note with a recap of tomorrow's Columbus event. Tell everybody that I hope that all goes well, that went well. And then one last question, one last story that you may not know, and that is that when Kim got that Oscar, I mean, Barry had handed it to him and everything, he got to pose a lot with Dustin Hoffman. And he'd say, I'm with a star, I'm with a star. And Dustin put his arm around him and said, Kim, I may be a star, but you are the heavens. And with that, I want you to know, I think you are doing some of the most important work in the world. And I know that you know that. Thank you, and welcome to this conference.